Welcome to the Develop Yourself podcast, where we teach you everything you need to land your first job as a software developer by developing yourself, developing your skills, your network, your habits, and more. I'm your host, Aaron Hayslip, and today we're going to be talking with Brian Schuster, who currently works as an engineering manager at IBM, but he's also an expert in all things blockchain. And recently, he's become a prolific coding bootcamp mentor as he's launched Schusterian Careers, which is a brand he's building to help career changers transition into tech. All right, Brian, man, thank you so much for doing the podcast. We were kind of chatting for 30 seconds, and I said we're going to start recording. This is going to be raw, and if it's unfiltered like past podcasts, I'm cool with that. But so for context for everybody else, we've been chatting lately, meaning we had coffee and we've like done this weird LinkedIn, Twitter back and forth thing. And then I did your podcast, which was so much fun to be on the other side of the microphone. So now we're bringing that conversation over here, and this time you're the focal point. But I think what's really interesting for our listeners, again, the context being folks who are learning to code, and this has really been the audience that you've been speaking to lately, is the fact that you started off mentoring with Project Shift, which was our previous in-person coding bootcamp. And then since then, you've like blown up as a mentor. You've got your own podcast. You're talking about helping bootcamp grads out. And so all I have to say, I would love to explore, your background of becoming a software engineer and getting to where you're at IBM. But more so, I think what would be relevant is to hear a little bit more about what kind of sparked that interest from you to start investing in basically what I would say is, from my perspective, bootcamp grads, right? Of helping this group of folks.
So there's a lot of ways to answer that. And so we'll go with the weird answer first and that direction. And let's go with the weird answer first. It's more, it's more real. Because again, I can go say, my connection to bootcamp graduate starts because of my own path that I've taken, in direction there. And that's part of the answer. But for me, I'm, especially since I was in college, I felt that, I never felt I performed to a very high level, whatever. Not that I did poorly. I just always felt I was a good student, but I was never a great student. I was a good athlete. I was never a great athlete. I was a good, I did debate in high school and I actually did decently well, but I never felt I really hit that potential. So by the time I kind of got done with college, I realized that, I kind of always felt like I missed out on something at that point, which now as a early 30 something seems absolutely ridiculous on so many levels to think that I've missed something, at that point. But again, that's a young kid in the way I was looking at it. And so for me, I really got driven to, I wanted to do something great with my life. And the thing that got stuck in my head was I wanted to be a great founder of like a big company. That was it. Like I had two movies at that point that I love, and I still love them. I watch them, but I get very different things out of them. One of them was The Social Network, and the other one was Pirates of Silicon Valley, which was about Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, and kind of that whole revolution.
Oh, nice.
And I got stuck on like entrepreneurs culture and that side of it. And so I started reading a ton. And so for me, I guess I locked into this idea of I'm going to kind of create greatness for myself by being a great founder and go in that direction. And that's just where my brain got stuck. So that was the start of it. So I went after school, I graduated, started working for my family business. And I just talked all about this during my podcast and what that journey looked like. But in my head, it was go founder. So I got going with that a little bit.
What do you mean go founder?
Say again?
What do you mean go founder?
But like, as in, that was in my head where it's like the thing I was going to do was found a company and I was going to grow it and get big. And that was the only thing that mattered to me in my life. That was all I talked about. It was obsessive,
Yeah.
And I thought that's what I did there. So that was kind of the genesis. And so I thought, well, how am I going to start a company? Again, I'm a 20 something in Indianapolis, not exactly Silicon Valley, but it's like I had ideas and I was starting this, but like nothing really took off. So how did I get it in tech? Well, I thought I missed the boat on tech. And I remember I went to an event at MIT, and it was the Entrepreneurial Development Program, which is a wonderful program. You got just a ton of really great people in a room kind of coming up with business ideas, and you kind of get thrown into a team together and you go through the entire entrepreneurial process. I learned a lot, and I did that when I was 23. And in my head, I was like, okay, I want to start a business. And now I'm in Boston. I get to see all these great startups. And I want to find a technical co-founder. That was what was stuck in my head. And so I talked to a bunch of different people who were technical folks. And like, I was trying to get them interested in ideas. And not that I had a clue what I wanted to do. I had ideas, but not execution or anything. And so I got done with the event. And I remember I just got stuck in my head. Again, another assumption that was faulty, but it generated movement, which was, man, like there's just not a lot of value for some 20-something business kid who's in this path. Like, I got to go technical. And so this is what really started me down, like,
because you had a business degree at that point.
Yeah, I had a business degree. Yeah, I had a business degree. I've worked for the family business for years by that point. I mean, like, I first started my internship when I was 15. My dad started
what?
Equipment maintenance insurance, small niche insurance, little rinky-dink insurance company in Charlotte, North Carolina. But I knew insurance, I knew business, and he really took pains to teach me and our family about this. And I mean, when we say we're a family business, we were a family business. My mom ran the marketing department. My dad was CEO for, we just, until last year, basically, where he kind of semi-retired. My two brothers worked for the business. My uncles worked for the business. My cousins worked for the business. So like, this was our language to talk. So that got deep seated, that knowledge there. But for me, I didn't consider it very valuable. So I decided I'm going to learn technology. I'm going to drive through. I'm going to get that. And then I went home, picked up a book called Learn Python the Hard Way, and just tore through it. Basically, I remember I timed myself, and I spent probably 250 hours in the first month and a half just studying Python and studying that book and going through and doing study. And by the end, I was a little bit good, but I started working my way through. So now all of a sudden in my head, I thought, basically, I had this pathway in my head. At first it was be a founder. Then it was go learn technology to end up becoming a founder. So that was like my path to go there. So it's almost like get one thing to go into the other. So that started me down this path where I slowly was working my way through careers, slowly working my way through technology and getting more and more technical over time. I started off as a glorified business analyst for my family's business, learning a little bit of SQL, learning a bit of Python. In my next role, I was a BI writer, which was more technical, but still the company didn't consider us technical. They considered us more like end user support. And we did a lot of work there. And, I met some great DevOps engineers and some people that got me more interested. I studied more and more. Next role I did, I was still a BI writer as a consultant, but it gave me an opportunity to work deeper in the stack. So I was actually building data marts by that point. I was actually doing analytics. I then made a switch to cloud computing, got my certification, and started working on cloud projects. And that's how I became a cloud engineer. Then I actually got a chance to work in New York as a serverless architect. And that was like, I didn't get hired into that role. And honestly, the only reason I got that role was because I ended up getting an Echo and experimenting with building skills for Christmas. And a year later, it got me a job, so that did that, but it didn't really feel real to me at that point. I was kind of like, well, I accident. So anywho, took off 15 months, basically worked for a venture capital firm and ended up, writing white papers about blockchain. And so that's a whole different story, but I want to get back to, how did I get interested in bootcamp grads? Went back, actually applied the jobs in a completely new market. I was living in Indianapolis. I had networks in New York and Indy, nothing in Raleigh, really. Some old friends, but that really didn't really help me. So I really started off my process. So I applied to a bunch of jobs, got accepted to a few of them by the end. I was very lucky. And it was a DevOps engineer. And it finally felt like, I had made it. I finally felt like involved. But here's the truth. And this is something I tell constantly. And I tell this to your bootcamp graduates. I tell it to other people. I never felt like I integrated in. At no point in the journey, not even at the end where I was a DevOps engineer, did I feel like I fully fit in. I never felt like this person. So I always kind of felt like an outsider. So what's funny is that this idea of becoming this founder, that idea eventually died away, at least I've realized it was not the right goal for me. There was a maturity aspect there. But I wanted to be a developer. I said I was going to be a developer. And at that point, it's like, integrated as a developer, just like, I still wanted to do it, but it was very difficult.
Yeah.
So anywho, I felt like an outsider. I felt like I kept taking my business skill, and that was really what was holding me up.
Yeah.
Because I could go into a job and I could add a lot of value with soft skills. Hard to sell as a role, but very easy to sell once I'm inside. And so when I was in the job, I remember, James Skeen was there and he did volunteer work for, Project Shift. And he asked, was I interested in coming along? And I said, yeah, I'd like to see it. didn't volunteer. I thought there was a panel, and I can't remember if he asked me to be on the panel or if he like was just there, but somehow I got to the event.
Tells me, I feel like you just came.
Okay.
And then slowly people started asking your input, and then at least that's in my head. I don't know if that's actually happened.
No, actually, I don't know the actual genesis of it, but we're going to make this the genesis because it did actually happen, but I don't know if it came first. I was there at the event, and I saw a bunch of people, and again, I'd done speaking and writing and a bunch of stuff, like especially with the cryptocurrency stuff. I spoke and was helping people all the time, and so this was just helping people with development. So I thought, okay, cool. And so I remember there was like a panel one day, and it was a bunch of, boot camp graduates. And I got in my head or some reason, it's like, oh, maybe I'll do a talk here or something, even though it was like former boot camp graduates. I told that to Morgan, who was there, and Morgan said, you should go up there. She knew it was just boot camp graduates there, but she knew, maybe hearing from an industry professional would help. So she threw me up on there. And of course I've done like there, that didn't bug me at all. As a matter of fact, I love doing stuff like that. And then all of a sudden, like I was halfway through, and like I was sitting on that bed, those little chairs that you had up front in front of the group inside of WeWork. And I remember people started asking questions, and I just hit a groove where I just started getting into it. I actually took the white markers at some point. I started drawing on the board. I was connecting and stuff, and they really, really liked it. And it's like, the graduates really liked it. And I had enough of a system where I would go contact them afterwards. I would network with them and do that. And it just kept getting deeper and deeper and deeper. And so, like, I guess for me at the end of the day, like boot camp graduates really feel like this group, they're outsiders too, is really the case. And there are people who want to get in, and there are people who don't know how to do that. They're not sure of that case. And it always kind of felt like that striving. And so for me, I just really connected with that group. And I guess it's because of that never feeling 100% connected. Even just in the way I got started, where it's like, oh, I thought I was going to be a founder, so I did this through development, and I never fully integrated in, and like that made me feel like I was kind of getting closer to something where I'm almost called to do this work, where it's like, this is where I can make the most impact. So that's why.
So, I mean, there's a lot of things it's funny, by the way, like, again, we've talked quite a few times recently, and this is my first time hearing about the founder narrative, though. I didn't know that. What I was going to ask is a couple things along those lines. You mentioned something about soft skills and hard skills. Can you explain what you meant by that? You said something to the extent, maybe this is me just projecting what my feelings are. Something about like your soft skills in business weren't valued until you got the job.
Yeah. And this was kind of my concept of both T-shaped people, and people with a wide talent stack, with a lot of range. That's part of what I see, where it's like, I really, really value that. And on my team, actually, it's almost a problem, because I have people who don't fit that narrative, that I'm having to shift my mentality from, where it's like, these guys are deep and technical, and I don't want to lose them. But I do tend to value people with range. I know how to work with them.
Yeah.
So, So when you're first applying to jobs, I think this is answering your question. When you're first applying to jobs, and they go out there, like, people who are doing hiring don't really know how to get every single nook and cranny of their business involved there. In the same way that you, as an individual applying to a job, have to cut down your resume just to relevant experience. Somebody who's hiring for a job has to cut it down to relevant requirements. But at the end of the day, you're not filling a role per se. I mean, you are filling a role, but it's kind of an abstraction that, it does have some truth, where it's like, you need to do these things, but you're a part of a team. You're part of a greater business. You're part of the shifting landscape that comes in the future. And, like there are things where it's like, you need people who can be flexible and move around. And so, like, what I found is that I had a hell of a time getting jobs. Just it was for the amount of time I've actually worked, and the amount of time with relevant technology skills, I just was all over the place, and I just never knew how to sell myself, because it would be the same damn thing every single time I worked for a company, where I would get in basically by the skin of my teeth to actually go in and do, to get the role, the job. I always felt slightly underqualified for the position. I'd get in there, and within the first 6 months, I'd understand the technical side really well. But within a year, I was basically doing something that had nothing to do with my role. and I had additional things there. And this was because of the strong, I call it soft skills, but they're really not soft skills per se. They're just things that don't fit into the definition of whatever your role is. Some say it's communication, some say it's project management, but it's just additional useful skills. So, I mean, my most recent role is the best example. So I actually got to see a note my manager wrote about me before he left, basically, and thinking about who would be your successor to his role. And he said me, and now I'm actually in his role. So, good prediction from him. But he had to write down what my skill set was. And the average person had 2 to 3 roles that they did. He could not limit it down to less than 8 things I did for the organization. 8. I was an agile coach at one point. I was a project manager. I was an iteration manager for the team. I was the ops excellence lead. I was, technical support, and I did technical support. I did Python development. I did Kubernetes administration. And to actually have somebody in a role who can do that, you end up becoming like a glue to the organization where you piece everything together and bring them in. Really phenomenal. And that's what I say with soft skills, where it's almost like, or softer recommendations, where it's like, this is a great individual. They're great for the team. But you have to get a lot of trust with an individual for that to come forward. You can't just go off and say, oh, I'm really great, because that requires a lot of trust. So what ended up happening to me is that I would try to apply to a position and I would try to say these things, and I just ended up looking watered down. They didn't know what to do with me. They couldn't put me in a box. And so it took me a long time to recognize how to actually go and talk about that skill. And that's what I teach now, right? Where it's mostly your whole resume is about getting the very first interview. That's really what it's about. And then once you get that interview, it's still about the role, but you're trying to throw in the details from your experience, what you did in the past, what those past experiences taught you about the role, to just give hints that there's something more under the hood there. And because even in my job, it took me 6 months to really get traction on that. But by a year, I was basically in a new role entirely. So that's something that's really important for boot camp graduates, because that's like their greatest strength, to be that sort of individual on the team, not the deep expert, the person with range,
the person with range. No, I love that. And, I think the thing that made me want to ask that is, I hear this a lot, and this was true for me too, which was, there you are with that liquid death again.
That's good.
For me, it was, because I find a similar narrative in my background that you're talking through, which was, I wanted to be a founder, but I was always on the outside looking in, which I want to get to that whole idea as well.
Right.
So I just knew to myself, how am I going to, I had some friends who were genius software engineers. And I still think to this day, they're some of the best software engineers I've ever met, like just love to program, like they love to build their own languages, just ridiculous stuff that I would never do. But it's like, why would I ever convince them to start a business with me? I've got all these quote soft skills. I'm a self-starter. I think I'm, okay naturally in terms of leadership, etc. But unless I was an engineer and knew how to speak their language, I feel like there was nothing there. And then moreover, for the actual job search, let alone like starting your own company, for the actual job search, I had this experience where it was impossible for anyone to consider any of my actual experience. And I think I'm maybe a year younger than you. But so I graduated school with a religious studies degree, like we talked about before.
Right.
And my issue was, how do I quantify any of my experience in tech as something that's valuable? And it wasn't on the outside, right? But for me, it was this idea of becoming a software engineer was, it's black or white. Like, you can build software or you cannot build software, right? And if you can build software, then sweet, we'll hire you. There's a position here for you. And that's what was so upsetting for me, is at one point in my journey, I'd had all this experience. I'd started this code school in Israel, etc. And I got an offer as a software engineer, but it was very, very low ball. I was like, look, I just went and raised capital, started my own thing. My investors got bought out. They made a return on their investment. Like, I basically built in a whole organization in a different country. But when it came to applying for jobs, it was like, what do I apply for?
Right.
Software engineer. How much software engineering experience do you have? I was like, not much. It's like, okay, well, this is the salary we pay to not much software engineering experience people. And that was the hard part. And I still encourage I think, students who are interested in coding, I always say that coding's not for everybody, obviously, right? Not everyone should be a software engineer. But for like the high achiever type, I don't know what to say about them, but there's a cut of people that are cut from a different cloth, and it really doesn't matter what your background is or where you come from or any of those things. For the high achievers, I think it's possible that you could use software engineering as an on-ramp for a bunch of other stuff, because there is a path. Like, you learn to code and become a software engineer, learn technology. If you love it, then you can become a software engineer. And if you have, your foot in tech, now you've got a way to be able to, if you want to be a product manager, a leader, in an organization, you can. But, with your, as you said, quote, soft skills, there's no chance of that happening anyway,
Yeah, that's why when I'm doing like Schusterian and I'm thinking about what direction I want to take this, like I really I want to focus on the careers aspect of it, because I think that's really valuable. But really it's more about like opportunity and finding opportunity wherever you can, as it comes in. I mean, for the highest achievers, for the people that come out, like those individuals that you're talking about, I mean, I think it's, you start thinking about software development as software developer as a noun, but as you start to become more competent, you start to think of it more as a verb, where it's more you do something with it to accomplish a particular goal. It helps you scale an idea. It helps you put something into place. It helps you there. So like just giving people the idea that that is a potential and that's a skill you have to grow. Like you're not going to go from working for somebody else to yourself overnight. That's a challenging skill set, but you can teach yourself how to make prototypes, build online communities, go and preach to, talk to other people about their development, help solve their problems. And at that point there, as you start to proliferate the number of opportunities, then basically at that point, there's no path because the options they have in front of them are so good. The path would actually be a downgrade, And my hope is to give this to everyone or help them build this where it's like, just start skill stacking in these different areas and then take the opportunities that are in front of you, even if they seem odd or different. The odder and more different it is, the more rare and valuable it has the potential of being, and you're playing in a realm where, like, that's the thing. There really is no failure state. I mean, that's what thing. Like, if you go into a software development job, there is a failure state, not being able to do the role, not being able to live up to the expectation. But in your nights and weekends, there really is no failure. If you spend 3 months learning data science and then find out, hey, I suck at this, well, it's the 0% result and like the 90% result are all like, well, I suck at it and I'm never doing it again. The 90% is, well, I'm pretty good at it, but I don't really know what else to do with it. I got an interesting line item on my resume, But it's the area where the top 10% result is really good, and the top 1% is like throwing you into a new trajectory, right?
Yeah.
And that's a mentality people miss too, where they think of it like, a job where it's like, well, it's not paying me. And it's like, well, right, not yet, but you're in a different, there are different rules in this area. So I hope to get that out to people that they can start thinking about software development differently and what it can do for them.
Yeah, I love that. A transition from noun to verb, and then there's an exploration of what's possible beyond that.
Right.
Yeah, and I think, to that point about failure, the most common thing I see is inconsistency, right? If you start on a path and then you quit it before you ever realized, because I think there's always like this sense of resolution happening to an extent, like, your example of someone who gives data science a shot for 3 months. 3 months, to be honest, and to be in one direction is much longer than a lot of people go down. Like we always experience we always call it the learning cycle of death, where beginners who are learning to code online, they'll start with one language and then they'll just switch languages like every 2 weeks because someone told them that, some of the language is the best language to learn, which is, all right, well, if you were consistent with whatever garbage language you want to learn, you would have realized that they're all pretty much the same,
Yeah, right. And they open you up to different opportunities, but you don't know, there is a discovery phase here, that's something I try to convey is that we like to think of learning as a personal, like purely a personal endeavor, that it's something where there's like, I'm going to go learn JavaScript, and that is something that's wholly on me, that that I'm building it myself, and that how good I am at this thing is 100% decided about how hard I work at it, which is true in a very narrow sense, right? Like, for example, if you go and decide JavaScript, if you spend 100 hours on it compared to yourself, you are definitely going to be much better. So that's a useful mentality for getting going and moving in a direction. But honestly, there's a whole social element to this that really tells you what you should be working on. I mean, I learned this with data science. So data science, and when I was learning blockchain. So data science, I was like, it was 2013 or 2014. I got really interested in machine learning. I got really interested in data science, and I spent a ton of time learning about this field. And so I was learning, machine learning models. I was learning statistics, and I was just having a blast learning this. So then I go to a local meetup for data science, and it was the Indianapolis Big Data Meetup, I think, in 2014. A lot of great people there, and I remember sitting in the room, and I met a guy there who was just randomly came in. He was working on data science models. I'm thinking, oh, can you tell me what you're working on? He was basically at home with 4 GPUs running some complex neural network, and I just stopped and I went, I'm just blown away. Like, this guy knows so much more than me beyond anything. I thought this was a new field. No, this is so much more. And so I looked at it and it's like, man, I would have to study a long time before I get anywhere close to where this guy's playing, there. And even with the guys who weren't so good or who were not as impressive, they were way beyond me. So I realized I'd have to take a long time to do it. So that was discouraging. So a few years later, I was learning blockchain. And this was a tech that I kind of felt similar, where it's like my head was spinning and wasn't sure there, but I was really fascinated. I read all the books on it. And so then I went to, I was in New York for my travel, and there was a meetup like there, and it was a big meetup. There were like 300 people in this room, and Joseph Lubin, who was the founder of Consensus in New York, but he was one of the founders of Ethereum, basically. He was one of the 8 folks that wrote the white paper, and smart dude. So anyway, he went there to talk to the group about Ethereum, and I was like, I had that experience in my head of like me getting smoked by that data scientist. So I was kind of looking forward to it, where I was like, okay, I want to meet the guy who's just going to just kick my ass on blockchain here, that they know more than me there. I'm in a room with 300 people. No one can do it. It's like, keep in mind, this was not, the Ethereum was not a household name when I went here. This was like 2016. This was before it had really hit the big time, nationally. So like the only people who would go and see this guy are like the people who know more than average, way above average. And I couldn't find these damn people. The only people who knew more than me were the guys that actually worked for him, the people who actually worked at this company. And so for me, that was like, like in the data science side, I went to a small network meetup in Indianapolis and was just blown away, where it's like, man, I don't have anything to contribute here. I went into the room with the blockchain folks, and I was one of 100 people who actually in the group knew. And then that's when I decided I was going to pivot from writing about data science and, BI, and start writing about blockchain online. And that's when I became one of the top contributors on Quora pretty much, overnight. Within 30 days, I was a top contributor. I had a month where I had 1 million views in a month. And that was the thing there. So I still had to put in the effort to get that good. But for me, I had no external sense of how good I really was until I could get to other people and actually compare my skill set.
Yeah. No, that's a really great point. Yeah. Most of us are learning. And I remember, man, at a much different level, having that similar experience where, I was doing videos online and teaching myself how to program through books. And I remember the first time I actually had coffee with somebody and sat across the table from them. I'd been doing it all alone in my bedroom,
right.
And this was 2010. So there wasn't that much like a learning kind of buzz online when it came to programming. Then I sat across from this guy. I remember this confirmation of, wow, like this is the best feeling in the world to be able to have a conversation about the stuff that I've been doing privately in my bedroom. It just affirmed how much I actually knew.
Right.
I wanted to ask, because you talked a ton about feeling like an outsider in terms of the software engineering world. Do you still feel like that?
Yeah, I do, but in a completely different way now. I feel different, and I don't think that's ever going to go away, because of this unique dual background I had, and that's kind of how I justify it in my head now of why I was experiencing this. The truth is that like it would have been very easy in my early career to just have one discipline in technology or one in business, to be quite honest.
Yeah.
And honestly, there was this uncomfortable jostling between the two roles where I was really, really well qualified for program management and project management, but the amount of money I could make doing software development and the amount of need in software development too meant that I was always way more valuable than just a business person. But when I went to that job, I was always not as quite qualified and not disciplined there. So I was always in the middle of these two roles. And it's like, man, it would have been so easy for me to just give up on the technical stuff or give up on the business stuff and just make one. And it never happened. I mean, that's what was supposed to happen when I joined IBM in 2019. Yeah. I was supposed to go and say, I'm a DevOps engineer. That is what I'm going to be known for. I'm going to study DevOps. I'm going to do this, and it's going to be clean. My resume is going to be clean. I'm never going to have to worry about being this dual person again. And within a year, half my job was operational excellence. Within a year. But something flipped. Because before, it was an anchor. Before my business background, or I'm not sure, you could look at the technology pulling down the business or business pulling down the technology, but either way made it really hard to like not have, like just to be able to sell myself in the general market. Personally, my network was huge and my network loved me. I mean, in Indianapolis, I had basically 2 to 3 open job offers that if I just wanted to walk in and work for them, I could do it because they knew me. But if you didn't know me from Adam, it was much more challenging. But when I entered the role at IBM, all of a sudden, all of the things that were problems ended up being huge, huge assets. Being able to go into a room with business folks. And now that I'm older, and honestly, the balding hair doesn't hurt me. It makes me look much older, right? It makes me look much older. I'm well-spoken. I get into a room, so I have a lot of confidence about me. I can talk about technology. I can talk about business. All of a sudden, it ended up being this huge force multiplier. Huge force multiplier. So something that ended up slowing me down to begin with is now flipped in the other direction where it's accelerating my career. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, jumping from an associate developer to managers, I'm not going to say it's unheard of, but it's rare. It's rare for somebody in my position to be able to do that and to be able to do it well too at this time, to kind of go into management, be able to handle the complexity. And so now it's starting to actually help me where it's very easy for me to get roles. It's very easy for me to sell myself and go into that because now I have a home for it, I guess, to say. Now that I'm a manager with a technical background, I know how to fit those things together. And now that I'm doing Schusterian, I know that direction. It's a really interesting narrative to be able to go and tell people. So it just felt like getting into the right position, having the right people around me really made that work. And that's something with a lot of the boot camp graduates that it's useful to go and find those folks. They're hard to find, but like I remember the very first interview I did with IBM was because at that point I'd just been doing technical and all the interviews were just technical, and most of them were like underwhelmed by my background. Most of them were where they were accepting of it, but it wasn't as much as they were hoping. Versus I met James Skeen in his role, and he basically at the very first interview I was kind of down on my business background. It's like I got like not apologizing for it, but not far off. I remember he stopped me in the conversation and said, actually that's a huge asset. I mean, if you go into a place and you do that, I mean, he was literally, this is my first conversation with him. I started talking about it. He says, that could be a huge asset, especially for a place like IBM. We really need people who can do both. Yeah. And he recognized that. And this ended up, so like he recognized that in the very first discussion I had with him. And that ended up being the theme of our entire relationship together as we built the Cloud Systems Tribe, just integrating business and technology to get to a solution. So really, you want to you should be able to sell yourself to anyone and be able to work any role. You do that, but to find people who get you, that's really magical.
Yeah. And by the way, James Skeen has been mentioned quite a few times in this podcast by my guest. So I think it's special to have someone like him in your corner.
Oh yeah.
As I'm hearing this, I know, like, one, to be frank, though, like probably where I should push the conversation is towards boot camp grads and all that.
Sure.
I keep hearing you talk about you have that narrative of hoping to be a founder. And then as you're talking about your experience and skill stacking, and just how like you come to this point now where you can walk into any place, or you could in Indianapolis, a couple places, and get a job. And probably it's true now, right? Especially engineering management, because for engineering managers, there is a category for business and technical experience, right? Whereas before you were kind of shoehorned into like having to do one or the other.
Right. And I aged into it finally, I guess you could say.
Or maybe your hair did.
My hair did, yeah. I finally hit the magical experience point where it became a huge asset.
Yeah, exactly. But all I can hear is how valuable you would be as a founder. So tell me about that like process, because I think this isn't everybody, but there is a good portion of the kind of people who listen to our podcast who I think in a good way are naive enough to believe that going through a boot camp is a path to becoming a co-founder of a tech company. So how did that, you said at one point it all but died. Tell me about that. I mean, is it as depressing as it sounds? Probably not.
No. No, because it was more of an evolution, or I guess I should say, like, because right now I'm in the middle of the Schusterian careers. I don't know what that's going to look like, but I'm following I'm doing the minimalist entrepreneur work there. I really enjoy that stuff. I have no interest in leaving my job at IBM. I love my work. I love my team and what I'm doing. But like, I find that I'm a creative at the end of the day, and this is my creative endeavor. Yeah. No, when I said the idea of me being a founder all but died, it was not the fact that I gave up because I thought I would never do it, more that it wasn't the right goal. And I truly mean that, where it was like, that's the thing. Like, I had this, again, because of the movies I watched and because of this idea I had of what it meant to be a founder. And I used to read, Inc. magazine and Entrepreneur, and this really sexy idea of what it meant to be in there. I got to meet a lot of founders. Like, actually, that's the thing. I used to reach out to founders in Indianapolis and just meet them for coffee. And a lot of those guys ended up being my friends. I mean, one of the guys I reached out to randomly, Ilya, he ran, or Ela, he ran a Double Map in Indianapolis, and the company sold a few years ago. Now he started a cryptocurrency company, and we talk all the time. We're close friends. So I got to see like what this looks like up close there. And so a lot of the, it's a job. It's a good job, and it's got its benefits, but there's just a role there. So for me, I matured out of that. That being said, the idea of taking control of your income streams, being able to get your own role, being able to be flexible in what it means to be working for someone is incredibly powerful. I mean, I have this belief that in the next couple decades, the way our technology is advancing is going to continue pushing the boundary on what a traditional organization means. Open source companies are going to start figuring out how to monetize in interesting ways. I mean, like, that's what I like. Cryptocurrency organizations and the way that they do, like, or not DAGs, decentralized autonomous organizations, DAOs, are going to continue moving, and the way people get paid is going to expand. Where it's like, I think, like, again, another interesting idea. Like, we today look at people like Steve Jobs and Bill Gates and founders as having this special magic sauce and this thing that makes them wholly different from other people. And we could put these magical qualities on them to say that these people have this and this and this. And the truth is that they're a product of a lot of good fortune, a lot of benefits, a lot of privileges, a lot of hard work, and all these things that end up making them. But the truth is, I think that their traits at the end of the day are just, they're teachable traits. They just come from extraordinary circumstances. Like, again, like being somebody who was a mathematician like 1,000 years ago or something like that, or somebody who knew those arts, were incredibly privileged individuals to be somebody who could learn that. You had to work very hard, but they had to do a lot of the learning on their own to be to that level. Stuff today that we teach kids in school in, like, first and second grade, it's stuff that an average person 500 years ago would have never known. I think the phase we're going into is that whatever those magical qualities are going to start getting disseminated down, because we're going to do a better job teaching them. We're going to do a better job putting the circumstances together for people to take control of, take control of their career, their ownership, what it means to be a part of an organization. Things like the Gumroad organization and how they've kind of fractionalized, consulting work. companies like, Zappos that went to a completely self-managed process there. I think that accountability, that ownership, and then having to take that and move that is going to be revolutionary. And so for me, my hope is for some of these bootcamp graduates and people who do want to be founders, that they take this road and they realize that you can do so much more with this if you decide to continue to use that nights and weekends work towards starting your own business, being a founder, figuring out how to make your own income, because you learn to live with that weight. You learn to be the owner, which is something you just don't get when working a job. You just do not get it to the same level working a job there. And so I guess what my message would be to people who want to go through boot camps, the technical work itself will be useful in helping you scale, right? It'll be useful in helping you get going and move off there. Like knowing how to build a website, not being afraid of technology is a good skill, because like, again, the best scaling opportunities usually come from software. So knowing that is really helpful, but really it's the starting point. They can have all this technology, but if you're not finding opportunities to use it, to start, to do things on the side, it's not going to become anything. You just, it's a minimalist entrepreneur. Don't learn, just start,
Yeah. Yeah. No, I love that. It's funny that you say that. You said something about the ownership that happens whenever you're starting your own thing.
Yeah.
That doesn't exist. I always remember the last job I had where I got paid, that where I wasn't self-employed, was 2015. I remember my feedback from our VP of engineering and our meetings almost always was, Aaron, you need to have more ownership, which is just ironic because like immediately after that, I went and was forced to own.
Right. No. And that's something that I think it was one of my bonuses from working for the family business, because there's like it's a weird term, but like a culture of ownership in the way that you operate there, where it's like, because again, a business gives you the sense that you can just work the job and you can pass off things to somebody else. And that's not even a statement between enterprise and startups. That shit happens at startups all the time too, where you divvy up the work in kind of unnatural ways and you don't think about it, where it's like especially at startups where it's like you can clearly see the right hand slapping the left hand and it's like there's a problem here, but everyone is just kind of acting like it's normal or like there's an issue. So like it's very painful, honestly, because like because of the family business and the way I've operated, I've always had this kind of ownership mentality. Like I would look at like the startup, like, the startup I worked at after my family business, and look at it and go, look, I know there's things I don't see, there's ideas I don't get, but there is just something clearly wicked happening here, something truly not good, and it keeps happening over and over. This is a problem we need to solve. And so it's frustrating because like you try to take that level of ownership and people will kind of push you back, right? Because that's the thing. They want you to be onerous. They want you to have enough ownership to some level, but it's like an unnatural level. Like, we're more comfortable owning the whole piece of it, or a very clearly defined piece where this is mine, this is yours, or none of it, right? Not doing that, or you own some sort of role, versus like jobs sometimes are like almost an inappropriate level of ownership. Like, where it's like, oh, you need to own somebody else's work because they're not doing their job, but that's okay. We can't really deal with that. And that's like, instead of going to them and being like, hey, we can't live with this, or we can't do this, they want to instead say, no, that's your manager's job to talk to them and do that. And it's just, yuck. I've never liked being in places like that, because it teaches those bad habits. Because when you do it on your own, it's all you. It's all you.
And so, that being said, kind of transitioning to with our last few minutes here, talking about, what you're doing with Shoesterian. Is that what I'm saying right?
Shoesterian Careers. Yeah.
Shoesterian Careers.
I just rebranded last night. My brand was a confused effing mess, and my personal inside of it. So it's like I finally said Shoesterian Careers. It's there. Great. We got the brand.
As opposed to Shoesterian Logic, right?
Yeah. I mean, I've always liked the Shoesterian name. And actually I got that from a friend of mine at that company that I worked at. I mean, basically, because we talk about business and technology, and he was one of the mentors that got me really into DevOps, got me into technology or whatever, but really encouraged me to really lean into the business and technology aspect that I had. He really did that. And I remember we were walking around and I was giving him some of my ideas and we just talking about it. He all of a sudden said the line, you really do got something like that's like a Shoesterian logic about the way you do using my last name. And I thought, oh, that's a good name. So I've always liked that. So yeah, but that's the thing though. Like I've always been uncomfortable like trying to create a brand. Like I thought that like I've never found a good place in my home. And honestly, Minimalist Entrepreneur gave me a good way to actually like gave me a good mental model for that. So now it's like,
by the way, this is the book that Sahil Lavinia, is that how you say his last name?
I have no clue, but that sounds right to me.
Yeah, did he actually released it, right? Or have you just read the?
Yeah. No, I actually have it sitting on the back shelf there over there. He just released it October 26th, I think.
Yeah, I've been meaning to buy it. I'd forgotten when it was going to be released. Okay, so you're building that. Tell me a little bit about that process. So you kind of translated this passion of, I mean, obviously your career, your experience, right? Of kind of merging business and tech skills, and obviously as you've gone through this process, have realized that you forged a career that looks different. And I think one of the cool things that I've been learning about myself, I think is definitely true in you, is these sort of counterintuitive principles are seemingly emerging from the content you've been putting out. So she's sharing careers. Right now you're really focusing on helping bootcamp grads. Like, what's the next evolution or phase to that?
Right. So, I mean, like I actually, in the Minimalist Entrepreneur Twitter community, which is the only community I'm a part of, actually, I actually started like typing this out like on Twitter. And honestly, if you've never tried that, you know, I would 100% recommend it, because you basically, because I get to kind of talk through ideas. Other people get to jump in and kind of put ideas out there. So I get to do it. So I've been saving all the threads. I'll send it afterwards if you're interested in seeing like what my thought process was. But I basically started with saying like, okay, look, I love helping people. I do this, but I feel like I do really want to start making some income from this some way. It doesn't have to be big, and it doesn't even have to be the main point. Because it's like, I mean, I've had past jobs where it's like, I need to get the hell out of here. Let me make my own income. I love my job. I love what I do here. It's just, I want to make this, I want to make an income from this to actually make this sustainable to some level. And just because it's fun, right? I think it's enjoyable. So I started off writing, and I was thinking like, well, where is this? It's like, oh, do I write a book? Do I do a course? Which is obvious. And I don't know when the flip happened, but all of a sudden at some point I went, well, what about like a workshop or an event? And I was like, well, like the thing that I really, that I notice is that there's a lot of education in the world, a ton of education, right? And there's a lot of interesting funnels that people, and there's a lot of career advice out there, but there really isn't anything specific to maybe like technology, but I find that there are very particular on-ramps to like particular careers. Like what you need to do as a full stack developer is a wholly different beast than somebody who's in data analytics and cybersecurity. The nuts and bolts are different. The nuts and bolts are the same, like a career, but the really useful advice is in that middle. It's like, well, what networks exist out there? What educational opportunities matter and which ones don't? What are the different experiences out there? What are the different requirements? Because again, there's some, like, if you want to be a cloud engineer, like a certification is good, but it's not a requirement, versus every single person coming out of cybersecurity gets a certification. And it's like, that's a big difference between the two. And if you were using the cloud mentality trying to apply, you may waste a lot of time thinking, oh, I can apply to a job and do that. And think, oh, nope, you need the certification. That is a requirement.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden I realized it's like, I think this is a one-day event where, here, because it's like, look, I don't need to give you more education. Though honestly, I'll probably do a course at some point just because I think it's interesting. But the really big value is not necessarily trying to give you education or networking. It's really trying to give you a fast track to this particular industry. It's like, look, you can spend time on your own trying to learn this field, trying to understand the networks, find the thought leaders, find the people, or I can bring you into a room for a day, give you 100 people who are doing on the exact same path, bring in the educators, bring in the boot campers, bring in people who've gone through the path, bring in hiring managers to actually talk about, hey, this is what I need out of you guys if you're going to apply this job, and fast track them so I can give them all this information. One, give them a packet that explains everything we went through, give them all the names of everyone that went there, and do that. And I thought, yeah, that actually sounds pretty good. Have a one-day event where you do this, make it virtual, go it for 8 hours. And the promise by the end is that you'll know the education paths that you have forward. You have the networks you can start integrating, so start asking questions now. You know exactly what the hire managers are looking for, and you have people who are actually hiring. You know the communities that you can go and actually start working for or working with to make that happen.
Yeah.
I thought, that sounds like a good idea. So right now I'm off building that right now, and that's with me. So I tested out this idea of the event, and I wrote a sales page, and I sent it to half a dozen people, and half of them went, I love this. This is great. Tell me what it is. So now I'm actually off now. I'm separating out the brand where it's like, because I also made a mistake of focusing too heavily on distribution for my podcast and not enough on the actual content. But that's a whole nother hour we'll probably have in the future on that itself. But anyway, I'm focusing on so I'm really refocusing on building up these events and really monetizing events. That's what I really, where I really think I add the most value and what I think is the most valuable to people. Focusing in on my podcast and really just expanding out the number of boot camps I speak to, the other groups that I influence, and working on that side. So really, that's where I am in the short term. Seems like a lot of fun. So I'm just going to keep going on this.
Man, I love that. And if you need any help with the event, let me know.
I'll make sure to reach out.
One other idea that you kind of pitched to me that I've been running with, and speaking of building in public, there's nothing's been done on this, but but I feel safe talking about it.
Sure.
I wanted you talked about this idea of like a hackathon because
yes.
you noted, and this is something I forgot to talk about the other day when we were having coffee. You noted that there are very few opportunities for sort of the bootcamp grad types to be able to show their projects to hiring managers. I think you started a thread on LinkedIn. And it was like, what are the opportunities? And it's like, well, it's like the demo day, it's looking at their portfolio, or it's the interview, which is kind of sad.
Yeah.
So my idea has been, and we did something like this maybe 3 years ago in a very small level, but basically a beginner's hackathon to where you can be a bootcamp grad or whatever, but the only requirement is you can't have you cannot yet have a full-time job as a software engineer.
Interesting.
It would be the pitch, and then different tracks depending on what your level of experience is, so that if you've got like full stack experience, then you can sign up for a team on that track. But if you only know HTML and CSS, there could be like a lower tier of basically folks building websites. Basically for the experience and then for the exposure, and then basically recruit a bunch of our mentors, different folks to come and help judge or even just assist in the building process.
Yeah. And that's what I think is a really important part, because that's a problem on both sides of the equation.
Yeah.
Where the only time people really get to meet people inside the industry are when they're all either you're already ready or you're about to be rejected, from the position, right? You have to hit that 6-figure threshold for us to actually communicate, versus there should be opportunities to talk beforehand where it's like you get managers. And again, I talk to most of these folks here. Many of them want to help. They just don't know how to help or what they would do there.
Right.
And, and even like something like a hackathon, it's like, hey, why don't you spend a weekend helping out a group of young folks here, to go through. They need mentorship. They want to go talk to these folks, and you're making that connection. You're making it personal. You're building something together. Maybe a few of them get a connection or get something going. It's like just trying to find opportunities for these groups to just interact and just some way that is in the interview process. It's a killer idea. It makes sense. And there's actually organizations that I see actually have made this like part of their business model, where they've had just do hackathons over and over. And I think, like I said, we'll see how this goes, because I know I already said I'd help you with this, and I want to. I'd like to see this through to see where this actually goes. But to just give people that time to interact and just see them, I think would be very valuable. It's worth experimenting with.
Yeah, 100%. Brian, before we head out here, definitely want you to be able to give a plug. What's the best place for folks to find Schusterian Careers?
I just bought the domain this morning, so very likely it'll be up once I redo my website. It's schusterian.careers there. But I also have a newsletter, which is schusterian.substack.com is another site. I'll send you this links out there. And I'm really in transition, but everything is going to be on those places there. And it's going to be, my podcast that I have, my newsletter I maintain, as well as an events page that I'm going to be going, and probably some speaking. Will probably be the four things I really link in on. But I'll have that all revamped. Again, follow the Twitter threads to figure out exactly when, because I'm not going to stop working on this until it ends up getting launched in that direction. So that's about Schusterian.
I love that. We'll put all that in the show notes so that people can find the physical links. And any last kind of piece of advice for folks that are in this season of either hoping to maybe considering jumping into a boot camp, or probably what is more valuable from your perspective, would be folks who have recently graduated boot camp and are on the job search. Like, what's the top piece of advice that you've been seeing?
I mean, for people who just graduated and went through it, I mean, really finding a system that really works and really being iterative with the whole job hunt process. And this is very specific for people who have graduated, but I found it to be the most useful. The most useful job hunting folks, the people who've done that, are very flexible in their approach. They have multiple resumes that they're experimenting out. They're testing it out. They really get an info. Like, that's the thing. They send out hundreds of resumes because they're getting feedback. They're getting information. I did 10 for this role. Nothing hit. I did 10 here. Oh, 1 hit. I did 10 here. 3 came back. Okay, that's interesting. What was different about this? And iterative. So, like, it's not a static process. You just don't start job hunting as the same thing. You iterate over and you have an experimental mindset. If you do that and you have your eyes open, it doesn't matter how long it takes for you to be able to get that. You're constantly experimenting. You're going out there and learning. And, like, you know, I mean, that's the thing. If you get to like 200 or 300 without any interviews, there's something wrong with the process in general there.
Yes.
But that's what I would say. Be experimental with the way that you go about this approach, and really the whole process. I mean, experiment, take risk. Take risk with your resumes, take risk with how you job hunt, take risk with what you learn, take risk with who you network with. That is going to be the thing that opens you up to all the opportunities. Just increasing your tolerance for risk and be able to take that will free you from a lot of the fears that you get up with getting into a stale job or being hunted out. Like, that's the key. That's really the key.
Beautiful. Well, thanks, man. I appreciate the time.
No, this has been an absolute blast, Aaron.
I'm looking forward to all that's happening over at True Syrian Careers, and can't wait to follow your journey. And also thanks for that example of building out loud. I'm processing that too. I'm like, all right, I gotta start a Twitter thread.
Yeah, it's so liberating, and it's fun because it's still working, but you're thinking it through, and it's like, what's going through my head right now, and being able to do that. And did that. I mean, and actually, like, people will jump in and they actually introduce me. Like I said, I was going to do an event. Some guy said, hey, why don't you take a look at this guy? And it's a guy who literally does master classes on virtual summits. And I'm like, yeah, I need to talk to that guy. I'm talking to him Friday. So it's wonderful. It's wonderful. I highly recommend it.
That's awesome, man. All right. Well, thanks, Brian. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you so much, Aaron.
See ya. All right, if you are looking to change careers and become a software engineer, and you want folks, mentors like Brian in your corner who you meet with regularly via Zoom one-on-one, then check out our online code school, Parsity. You can see that at parsity.io. It's parsity.io. And until next time, this is the Develop Yourself podcast. Thanks for tuning in.